The roses were blooming when Marcus Cole pulled into the driveway. He sat in the rental car for a long time with the engine off, not quite ready to open the door. He had not seen this house in 5 years. Not since the week after the funeral, when he locked the front door, put the key under the mat for the property management company, and drove to the airport with one bag and no plan. He had not been ready then, and some part of him was not sure he was ready now. But his daughter Lily was starting kindergarten in September, and his mother-in-law had pulled him aside at Easter and said, quietly and without ceremony, that it was time. The child needed a home, not a furnished rental in another city. Home. So he had come back, and the roses were blooming. That stopped him. He stepped out of the car and stood in the driveway, staring at the side of the house where Diana had planted her garden the spring before she got sick. He remembered those rose bushes as small, scraggly things she had ordered from a catalogue, 4 of them in plastic sleeves propped against the fence. He remembered her kneeling in the dirt in her old college sweatshirt, laughing at herself because she had never gardened a day in her life and had no idea what she was doing. He remembered telling her they probably wouldn't take. He remembered being wrong. That was in the spring of her last healthy year. Her last healthy one. The garden had been young and uncertain then. What he was looking at now was something else entirely. The 4 rose bushes had grown into a full, deliberate border along the south fence, rich and climbing. Deep red and pale gold and cream trained up the lattice that hadn't been there before. Lavender edged the front bed, fat and purple in the late June heat. A climbing hydrangea he did not remember at all had made its way up the corner post. The stone path Diana had started and never finished, a half-dozen mismatched pavers she had bought from the hardware store and set into the ground that last summer, had been completed. It ran the full length of the side yard now, even and clean, bordered by low ornamental grasses he couldn't name. Marcus walked the length of it with his hand trailing along the fence, not speaking. She had no idea whose grief her faithfulness was tending. Her name was Renee Holloway, and she had worked for the property management company for 11 years. She was 38 years old, lean and careful in her movements, with a quiet steadiness that made her the worker her supervisor gave the long-term properties to, the ones where something delicate was being held in trust. She had 2 children of her own, a son named Damon, who was 13 and already taller than she was, and a daughter named Priya, who was 8 and allergic to everything, or so it seemed. Renee drove a 12-year-old sedan that she had long since paid off and was nursing toward another 100,000 miles. She left her apartment every weekday at 6:15 in the morning to drop the children at her mother's, and she returned in the evening to cook dinner and help with homework, and lie awake sometimes in the small hours, thinking about whether she was giving them enough. She was not thinking about Marcus Cole the day she first came to his house. She was thinking about the water bill. The notice had come on a Tuesday, the same Tuesday Priya had been sent home from school with a fever, and Renee had spent the afternoon fielding calls between her supervisor and the paediatrician, trying to hold 2 things at once and managing neither perfectly. The water bill was $43 more than last month. She had checked the faucets in the apartment twice and found nothing, which meant it was probably the building's shared line, which meant it was probably the landlord's problem, which meant she was going to spend 2 weeks trading voicemails with the building manager before anyone looked at it. She knew how it went. She had lived in the same apartment on Delwood Street for 8 years, and she knew how everything went. She was good at her job because she was the kind of person who kept track of things. She knew which of her properties had a slow drain in the back bathroom and which one had a contractor who overcharged if you didn't check his hours, and she knew which neighbours to call if something looked off at one of the vacant homes on her route, and she knew, without checking her phone, which day of the month each inspection was due. Her supervisor had given her the longest route and the most sensitive properties precisely because Renee Holloway did not let things slip. She noticed. She remembered. She showed up. Her apartment was orderly in the way of small spaces where not much can afford to be out of place. Damon's school things were on the left side of the kitchen table. Priya's were on the right. Renee's work bag hung by the door, and inside it was her clipboard, her spare set of property keys on colour-coded rings, a legal pad, and a granola bar she put in fresh every Monday morning and ate by Wednesday without fail. She did not think of herself as a disciplined person. She thought of herself as someone for whom the alternative to discipline was chaos, and chaos was something she could not afford. Her mother, Louise, said Renee had been this way since she was small, said she was the child who made her bed without being asked, who remembered to turn off the stove, who noticed when the toilet in the second bathroom was running and told somebody. Louise said it like it was a compliment. Renee wasn't sure it was. There was something a little lonely about being the person who notices, because the thing about noticing is that once you have seen something, you can't pretend you haven't. That was already in her, fully formed by the time she pulled up to 412 Calloway Lane for the first time. Her supervisor had handed her the file for 412 Calloway Lane in the first week of June, 5 years ago, 3 months after Diana Cole had died, and 2 weeks after Marcus had stopped answering the property management company's calls and simply left a voicemail that said, flatly, that he was going to be away for a while and that someone should look after the place. The house was empty. The lawn needed mowing. The mail needed forwarding. And the garden along the south fence, her supervisor had noted in the file, was in bad shape. Renee had walked the property that first day and stood in front of Diana Cole's garden and felt the particular quiet of something left mid-sentence. The rose bushes were in sorry condition, dry, cracked soil around their bases, 2 of them trailing canes that had not been cut back properly, one that looked to her like it might already be beyond saving. The stone path stopped 6 pavers in and ended in bare dirt. A trowel had been left on the ground beside the last paver, still there, still in the place where someone had set it down, intending to come back. Renee was not paid to tend gardens. Her job was the house, the mail, the exterior inspection, the contractor coordination when something needed repair. She was paid a flat monthly rate to check in on 412 Calloway Lane twice a week and make sure no pipes burst and no one broke a window. She went and bought a bag of garden soil and a bottle of rose fertilizer on the way home that evening. She paid for it herself. She told herself it was a small thing, a few dollars, and that it would be a shame to let those roses die. She did not tell anyone. That first summer was the hardest. The sick rose bush she had nearly written off was a deep red variety with thick stems, and it was stubborn about coming back, slow and doubtful through July, and Renee found herself checking it twice a week with something that was not quite worry exactly, but was close to it. She had bought a small hand cultivator at the hardware store, a 3-pronged tool the length of her hand, and she used it to loosen the soil around the base of each bush every few weeks so the water could get through. She worked on her lunch break mostly, half an hour, sometimes 40 minutes if she had pushed back her afternoon route. She kept her gloves in her work bag. In August, she came one afternoon and found that 3 of the canes on the cream rose bush had a grey, powdery coating on their leaves that she didn't recognise. She spent that evening on her phone looking at images of rose diseases and came back the next day with a spray bottle of diluted baking soda solution she had mixed in her kitchen that morning, which a gardening forum said might help. She sprayed every leaf carefully. She came back 4 days later and checked again. The coating was lighter. She sprayed again. By the 3rd week, it was gone. She didn't tell her mother about any of this. Not because she was hiding it, but because she could not explain it in a way that would make sense. Louise would have said gently that Renee was working herself too hard again, that she was taking on things that weren't hers to take on, and Louise would not have been wrong. Renee was doing exactly that. She was taking on something that was not hers to take on, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway. The deep red rosebush, the one she had nearly written off in June, put out 4 blooms in September. They opened slowly over a week, a dark red so saturated it looked almost velvet, and Renee stood in front of them on a Wednesday afternoon and felt, without being able to explain it, that Diana would have loved them. She did not know Diana. She had never met her, would never meet her. But a woman who set a trowel down in the dirt beside an unfinished path and intended to come back to it was a woman who would have loved those 4 late September roses. Renee took a photograph of them on her phone. She didn't send it to anyone, she just had it. If you have ever held something that someone else loved, not because you were asked to, but because it was still there and still needed holding, then you already know what Renee felt standing in that garden on her lunch break with her hands in the earth. There is a kind of faithfulness that doesn't ask for an audience. It just shows up, season after season, doing what the moment requires. That is the only way to explain what came next. By the end of that first summer, she had brought the sick rosebush back with extra fertilizer and deep watering, twice a week through the heat. She had deadheaded the spent blooms and trained the strongest canes to the existing fence rails. In October, she had found a tutorial online about winter-protecting climbing roses and spent an afternoon wrapping the bases in burlap she had picked up from the craft store for $4. She paid for that herself too. By the 2nd year, she had finished the stone path. She found matching pavers at a salvage yard on the east side, 12 of them for $15, and she set them herself on a Saturday morning when the children were at her mother's. She smoothed the ground, pressed each one level, brushed dry sand into the joints. When she stood back and looked at it, she felt something she didn't quite have a name for. Not pride, exactly. More like completion. Like a sentence that had been waiting 5 years for its period. She planted the lavender at the front of the bed, that same spring, with seeds she had started in a paper cup on her kitchen windowsill. She had looked up Diana once, in the second year. She had not been able to help it. A name in a file, a garden full of intent, and a trowel left in the dirt. She searched the name in the county obituary database on her phone, sitting in the driveway of the house before her shift, and she found a photograph, a woman who looked younger than Renee had imagined, with a wide smile and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a small girl on her lap. The obituary said she had been a 5th-grade teacher and that she was survived by her husband and her daughter and her parents. It said she had loved cooking and reading and being outside. Renee sat in her car for a while after that. Then she went and checked the mail and walked the house and pulled 3 weeds from the base of the gold rosebush. She had never once tried to contact Marcus. That was not her place. Her job was the house, and the garden was something she did because she could, because it was there, because Diana had clearly loved it and clearly been building something. Renee was only keeping the thread until someone came back to take it up. What she did not know was that no one had told Marcus about the garden. Not a word. The property management company sent him a brief email each quarter, noting the condition of the property. The report said the lawn was maintained and the exterior was in good condition, and there had been no incidents. Nobody mentioned the rose bushes. Nobody mentioned the stone path. Nobody mentioned that a woman who worked for $12.50 an hour above minimum wage had been spending her own money. A few dollars here, $15 there, to keep a dead woman's garden alive. The file did not contain that kind of information. Marcus had spent the first year in his sister's spare room in Atlanta. Then a furnished apartment in the same city, then a different furnished apartment when the lease was up. He worked remotely, technology sales, a job he could do from anywhere and had therefore done from nowhere in particular since Diana died. He took Lily to the park on weekends and to the pediatrician when she needed it, and to his in-laws' house for Christmas. And he did his job during the hours Lily was with the woman he had hired to watch her. And in the evenings after Lily was in bed, he sat in the quiet of whatever apartment he was currently occupying and tried to imagine going back to the house on Calloway Lane, and found that he could not do it. He had loved that house. Diana had picked it. She had walked through 7 houses over 2 weekends and kept saying not yet until she stood in the backyard of 412 Calloway Lane and turned around with an expression on her face that settled the matter. She had loved the south-facing yard. She had said the light was right. He hadn't known what that meant then, and he had learned it slowly, watching her in that yard across 2.5 years of weekends, the way she moved in it with a purposefulness she brought to very few other things. Diana was patient and gentle in most of her life, but in that garden she was certain. He had not been able to plant anything since she died. He had not been able to garden, not even the potted herbs Diana had kept on their balcony in Atlanta, which he had brought from the house and then watched go dry in the first summer without quite being able to water them. That was the kind of thing grief did. It made ordinary acts feel like a language he had lost. He could perform the steps, but the meaning had gone out of them. He didn't know that someone was in the garden on Calloway Lane every week of those 5 years, doing what Diana had left undone. He had not asked, and he had not been told. He received his quarterly emails from the property management company and read the one line that said the exterior was in good condition, and he told himself that was enough to know, and he went back to whatever he had been doing. What he did not know could not reach him. Not yet. By the 3rd year, Renee had found the climbing hydrangea at a nursery clearance sale, reduced to $3 because the pot had cracked and the plant looked ragged. She drove it home in the back of her sedan and kept it on her balcony for 3 weeks until it recovered, then brought it to Calloway Lane and planted it at the corner post where she had noticed, from how Diana's stone path curved, that something tall had been planned. She had trained it up the post with garden twine and wooden clips. It had taken all of that year and most of the next to get going in earnest. By the 5th summer, it had covered the post and was reaching for the fence rail. Damon had come with her once that 3rd year on a Saturday inspection when her mother couldn't take the children. He was 10 then, long-legged and deliberate, and he had followed Renee around the property with his hands in his sweatshirt pocket, looking at everything with the particular expression of a boy deciding whether something was interesting or not. He had stood at the edge of the garden for a long time. "Whose garden is this?" he asked. "The owner's wife planted it," Renee said, kneeling to check the base of the red rosebush. "She doesn't come anymore. She passed away." Damon was quiet for a moment. He walked slowly along the stone path, scuffing his sneakers lightly on the pavers, stopping at the corner post, where the hydrangea was then still working out whether it intended to thrive. "So, you're taking care of it for her?" he said. Renee considered that. "I'm taking care of it for whoever comes back," she said. Damon nodded like that made sense and went to sit in the shade of the fence with his phone. He didn't ask any more questions. He was 10 years old, and his mother took care of things that were not hers to take care of, and this was something he already understood about her without having language for it. She had never told anyone else. Not her mother, not her supervisor, not her friend Tanya from work who shared the route on the west side of the district. It wasn't that she was keeping a secret. It was more that explaining it would have required saying something she didn't quite know how to say. That some things ask to be kept. Not because there is any profit in it, not because anyone will notice, but because letting them go would cost more than the keeping. In the 4th year, she added the lattice along the south fence section where the climbing roses had reached as far as the existing rails would take them. She bought the lattice panels at the building supply store on a Saturday and drove them home strapped to the roof of her sedan, and she installed them herself over a long afternoon with a cordless drill she borrowed from her brother and a bag of exterior screws. She had watched 2 tutorials on the installation before she went. She was not a carpenter, but she was careful, and careful was usually enough. The roses reached the new lattice within 6 weeks. She watched them find it, the long canes moving toward the new structure with a purposefulness that she found privately to be one of the stranger and more moving things she had ever witnessed. She had not known that plants moved toward what they needed with such deliberate hunger. She had not known a lot of things about gardens before she started tending this one. By the 5th year, she knew the rhythms of the Calloway Lane garden the way she knew the rhythms of her own apartment. She knew what would bloom when, what needed watching in August, what the lavender looked like just before it peaked, and what it looked like just after. She knew that the deep red rosebush bloomed 2 weeks before the others, and that the cream one bloomed last and held its flowers longest. She knew that the hydrangea on the corner post preferred the morning shade and opened its blooms in layers over 2 weeks in June, like something reading itself aloud. She kept track of none of this in any notebook or record. She just knew it. The last inspection before Marcus returned had been a Wednesday morning in early June. Renee had driven out as usual, walked the house, checked the windows and the exterior faucets, forwarded the mail. The garden was coming into its best season. The roses had opened early in the warm weather and the lavender was buzzing. She had stood at the end of the stone path looking at the corner post where the hydrangea was finally, thoroughly, magnificently itself, and she had felt something she recognised as done. Not finished in the sense of abandoned, but done in the way a thing is when it has reached what it was always trying to be. She had locked the gate and gone on to her next property. 6 days later, Marcus pulled into the driveway. He came around the side of the house and found her there, which was not something either of them had planned. She was on her knees at the base of the gold rose bush with her pruning shears when she heard the gate, and she looked up to find a man standing at the entrance to the garden path, staring at her the way people stare when they are seeing something they cannot yet place. She did not know who he was for 2 seconds. Then she did. She got to her feet. She pulled off her garden gloves. She was wearing her work uniform, the grey polo with the property management company logo on the chest, and her name badge, and her work shoes that were a little muddy at the toe. She stood straight. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I'm Renee. I'm with the property management company. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were coming today. I'll give you your space." She reached down to pick up her bag. "Wait," he said. He was looking past her at the rose bushes, at the stone path, at the hydrangea on the corner post. He looked the way people look when they are trying to make sense of something that didn't used to be there, and also trying to make sense of the feeling it is giving them. "Did you do this?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Some of it," she said. "The path?" "Yes." "The hydrangea?" "Yes." He said nothing. He walked past her down the stone path, slowly, the way you walk when you're reading something, stopping to look at the lavender edging, crouching for a moment to look at the base of the red rosebush, where Renee had once spent 3 weeks fighting off powdery mildew, though he did not know that and she would not tell him. He rose and walked on and stopped at the corner post and put his hand against the hydrangea's lowest cane, just resting it there. His back was to her. She couldn't see his face. She could see his shoulders, though. She had done this work long enough to know the difference between how a person stands when they are looking at something that belongs to them and how they stand when they are looking at something that belongs to someone they have lost. He stood very still. His hand did not move on the cane. A long moment passed. "My wife started this," he said. "The roses, the path." "I know," Renee said. "It was in the file. I could see where she was headed with it. I just kept it going." He turned around then and she could see his face, and she understood that this was going to cost him something. Being here, seeing this. She did not look away from him, and she did not try to soften it. He was a grown man, looking at a piece of the life he had not been able to touch in 5 years, and he deserved to do that without anyone managing it for him. He turned around. His eyes were wet, which he was not trying to hide, and was also clearly not going to address directly. He was a composed man. She could see that, but the garden had gotten past his composure. "For how long?" he said. 5 years, Renee said. "Since the first month I had the property." He looked at her for a long moment. "The company paid you for this?" She shook her head. "I was paid to maintain the house. The garden was extra." He was quiet for a while. A bee moved through the lavender. From somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up, then faded. "Nobody told me," he said. "No. Why didn't you tell me?" She thought about it. "I didn't know you," she said, "and I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I was just keeping it until you came back." He pressed his hand briefly to his mouth. He looked away toward the street, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something formal, something that would let both of them return to their proper roles. Then he looked back at her. "My daughter is going to see this," he said. "She's 4. She's never seen her mother's garden." Renee nodded. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the garden wasn't already saying better. He went inside. Renee finished her inspection, locked up the exterior faucets, and took her clipboard around the full perimeter the way she always did. She checked the basement window latch, the outdoor electrical panel, the hose bib at the back of the house. She noted everything on her form. She did the job she was paid to do, completely, because that was who she was. She did not rush. She'd never rushed at 412 Calloway Lane. When she was done, she latched the gate behind her and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before she started the engine. The roses were visible above the fence line from where she was parked, the gold ones catching the afternoon light, and she looked at them for a few seconds and then started the car. She drove to her next property, a split level in the North District with a backed-up gutter, and she did her job. She climbed the ladder and cleared the gutter with her gloved hands and confirmed the downspout was draining and noted it in her report. She drove to the property after that, a townhouse with a slow drain in the front walkway. She poured water to confirm the grade was carrying it away from the foundation. It was. She noted it. She drove home in the evening and made dinner and helped Priya with her reading and listened to Damon explain the plot of a video game she did not understand but listened to anyway because Damon was 13 and talking to her willingly, and she knew enough to know that was a thing to protect. She did not think especially hard about what had happened at Calloway Lane. She had done what she had done. She had kept the thing. Now the person who owned it had come back. That was as much as she had ever asked from the situation. She was surprised when Marcus called. It was 3 days later. He had gotten her number from her supervisor. He asked if she had a few minutes, and she said yes. And he was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who has thought carefully about what they want to say, and is now not sure where to start. "I owe you," he said. "You don't," she said. "I'd like to talk to you about the house," he said. "About a different arrangement. I'm moving back in September with my daughter. I need someone to manage the property, but also to be there with some regularity. The house has been empty a long time. It needs more than an inspection." He paused. "I think you already understand what that house needs better than anyone." She listened. He named a number. She was quiet for a moment. The number was almost exactly double what she currently earned, spread across a 3-day-a-week schedule that would let her keep Damon and Priya's routines intact. The position was a dedicated property caretaker, which he had apparently spent 3 days writing up as a formal job description with benefits. He told her that flatly, not as a favour, not as charity, but as a business matter, the terms of which he had thought through carefully and believed were fair. "That's a generous offer," she said. "It's a reasonable offer," he said, "for work that has already been done faithfully for 5 years." She said she would think about it. She called him back the next morning. If you had asked Renee a year before any of this happened what she was hoping to get from those rose bushes, she would have told you that she wasn't hoping to get anything. And that would have been the truth. She had not kept the garden to be rewarded. She had not documented her extra hours or kept receipts for the fertilizer and the pavers and the hydrangea with any idea of being reimbursed. She had done it because she was made that way, because the thing was there and it was beautiful and it needed someone to stay. Faith doesn't always look like prayer. Sometimes it looks like a woman kneeling in someone else's garden on her lunch break, pulling weeds nobody asked her to pull. This is what happens sometimes when you do the quiet thing long enough. The world notices. She started in September. The same week, Lily Cole arrived for her first day of kindergarten. Marcus had enrolled her in the school 3 blocks from the house, the same school Diana had taught at before she got sick. Renee learned this on her first day back, when Lily came running through the back door after school and straight to the garden without being told, as if she already knew it was hers. She stood at the edge of the stone path in her school clothes and looked at everything. "Is this real?" she asked. She was asking about the flowers, but she might have been asking about anything. "It's real," Renee said from the kitchen doorway. Lily walked to the gold rosebush, the one Renee had nursed back from near dead that first summer, and she reached up and touched one of the open blooms with 2 careful fingers. She did not pick it. She just touched it. "Daddy said my mom planted these," she said. "She started them," Renee said, "and then they kept growing." Lily looked at her with the clear, unsettling directness of small children. "Did you help?" "A little," Renee said. Lily turned back to the rose and examined it for another moment with great seriousness. Then she said, to no one in particular, "I'm going to learn how." Renee stood in the doorway and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even known was tight. The pay was steadier than anything she had managed in years. She gave notice to the property management company the second week of August, and her supervisor had taken it with the quiet resignation of someone who had always known this kind of employee was on borrowed time. "I knew someone would figure out what they had," her supervisor had said. Renee had thanked her and meant it. 11 years was a long run. By September, she had arranged Damon and Priya's care around the new schedule. Her mother, Louise, who had watched the children for years on the early mornings, asked more questions than usual. "This man," Louise said. "You don't know him." "I know his house," Renee said. "That's not the same thing." "He's a good man," Renee said. "He loved his wife." Louise was quiet for a moment, which was her way of not arguing with something she had already decided to accept. She refilled Renee's coffee cup and changed the subject to Priya's allergy appointment, which was the family's way of closing a topic. By October, Renee had moved Damon and Priya to the school 3 blocks from Callaway Lane. Same district, better resources. The school Lily Cole was also attending for kindergarten, which meant the morning drop-off had a certain order to it that Renee had not quite anticipated. She drove Damon and Priya to school, and sometimes Marcus drove Lily, and sometimes they were in the drop-off line at the same time, and they nodded to each other in the particular way of adults sharing a practical arrangement that has settled comfortably. Damon came home one Thursday talking about a chess club. The following week he mentioned a robotics elective. Renee had to stand in the hallway for a moment, hand pressed flat against the wall, breathing slowly, because Damon had been at his old school for 3 years and never once mentioned a club. She didn't make a thing of it. She just listened and said that was good, and started dinner. She did not call it a miracle. She did not call it anything, because naming it might shrink it somehow. She just let it be what it was, a life that had changed shape while she was busy doing the work. Her supervisor asked her, the week she put in her transition notice, what had happened. "Someone came back," she said. Her supervisor nodded, but she could see she didn't quite understand. Renee didn't try to explain further. It was one of those things that was simple at the surface and not simple at all underneath. And the only way to understand it was to have been in that garden, on your knees, in the June heat, Doing something no one was watching you do and no one had asked you to do, because it was the right thing and because you were the one who was there. That is what faithfulness looks like from the inside. By November, Renee had started teaching Lily the names of things, the lavender that came back every spring from the same root, the canes on the climbing roses that needed cutting back before the cold set in, and which ones to keep, the difference between a healthy bud and one that had blight. Lily listened with the gravity of a child learning a language, and she forgot half of it immediately and asked the same questions the next week. And Renee answered them again without impatience, because that is how anything is learned. One afternoon in late November, when the garden was going quiet for the winter and Renee was wrapping the rosebush bases in burlap, Lily sat on the stone path beside her and watched. "Why do you wrap them?" she asked. "To keep them warm through the cold," Renee said, "so they can come back in the spring." Lily thought about this. "Like sleeping," she said. "Like sleeping," Renee agreed. Lily picked up a corner of the burlap and held it in place while Renee tied it off. She was 4 years old and she was helping. She didn't know she was helping. She thought she was just being there, which is sometimes the same thing. Marcus came out after a while with 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Renee and stood at the edge of the path, watching his daughter make herself useful with the burlap. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked. Then he said, "She's going to want to add a new rose bush in the spring." "I know," Renee said. "I was thinking a pale pink." He nodded. "Diana would have liked pink." "I know," Renee said, though she didn't know how she knew. She just did. He went back inside. Lily stayed until it was too cold, and then she announced she was cold with the matter-of-fact finality of small children who have made a decision and went inside too. The door closed, and the yard was quiet again. Renee finished wrapping the last 2 bushes in the fading afternoon light, the November sky going a pale, colourless grey above the fence line, the neighbourhood settling into its early dark. She worked the way she always had, unhurried and thorough, doing the thing correctly because it mattered to do it correctly, even now, even when no one was watching. Maybe especially then. The garden would sleep until March, and in March, when the first canes woke and the lavender came back and Lily Cole came running through the back door after school to see what had happened overnight, Renee would be there. Not because she was owed a debt, not because anyone had asked her to stay, but because she had given 5 years to this ground, and the ground had given something back, and some circles closed like that, quiet and complete, not announced, not declared, just finished. She tied the last knot in the burlap and smoothed it with her palm. The gold rose slept beneath it, patient as everything that knows it will come back. Think about the people in your own life who have done the quiet thing, the thing no one asked for and no one saw. Drop their name in the comments if you want to honour them, and if this story stayed with you, there is another one waiting that I think you will feel just as deeply. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are imaginary and created for entertainment purposes only.